Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother Asarimhotep with the Madhu Mandela Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture, as well as the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. Today is August the 22nd, 2021. And as always, we have a very, very powerful guest with us today. We will be interviewing Dr. Túndé Adégbolá out of Nigeria, who is a human language technologist and scientist and computer scientist. And we're going to get into, his life, his research, and future endeavors. And so all that and more when we return in just a moment. Welcome, welcome. Again, you have entered into the Mbongi, and I'm very excited to have this special guest with us today. And, we'll come back to him in just a moment. I want to thank each and every one of you who is catching us live. And then, of course, those of you who are catching the archives. And so this is an early morning interview, live interview that is. I know we normally do interviews in the afternoon, but our special guest today is live from Nigeria. So there's a 5-6 hour time difference where between Nigeria and here. And so, we're bringing it to you kind of early. So as you know, we interview, many very, very, very powerful and special people from around the world. And so, all times a day, you'll find these live conversations and powerful and meaningful conversations. So I hope you find these conversations inspiring and that they expand your mind and understanding of the world. And so before I get started, I just want to uh, make a few announcements. And first and foremost, today is going to be a double header. So we have Dr. Ogdegbala, Adegbola, with us today and this morning, and then later on this afternoon or this evening, we have Dr. Duarte Odara out of Brazil. So he's going to be live from Brazil. And we're going to be talking about classical African philosophy and ancient Egyptian Ptah and a whole host of other things on the menu. So y'all make sure and check that out. I think it's going to be 6 p.m. Eastern time. And um, and so yesterday we interviewed Dr. Pa Kofi Akins. And although he is from Ghana, we interviewed him live from Japan. So that's a 14-hour time difference between us and Japan. And so it was a very powerful interview. So if you can go back to the archive and on the YouTube channel for those who are listening on YouTube or for those who are listening on Facebook, um, that was a very powerful interview as well. And so also, I started a publishing company called Madhu Mandela Press, and we just released a new book from Dr. Chilemalema Mukinge out of the Congo, and it's called Muntu wa Nzambi, Portrait of Human as God's Special Creation, from African creation stories, religious beliefs, and cultural practices. And so we're going to have Dr. Mukinge back on the program so we can expound, on this very, very powerful work about uh, Baluba out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, philosophy, culture, and language. And so I'm very excited to have helped in the process of bringing this work into fruition. So you can go to the website currently right now, maduindelapress.com, and pick up your copy if you're here in the United States. Those who are not in the United States, I recommend going to amazon.co.uk or whatever is closest to you, so that the shipping will be cheaper or whatnot. But go to maduindelapress.com and you can get a hold of this new text here. And lastly, I am part of a powerful panel of distinguished scholars who will be traveling to Egypt in February of 2022. And so, Brother Anthony Browder, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Professor James Smalls, Dr. Solange Asprie, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, Dr. Wade Nobles, and Brother Infodishi Jehuti Times. And for those who don't know, these are all individuals who were also part of the Hoppy documentary film. And so, we're hosting, or akettours.com is hosting a tour of Egypt, and you have the opportunity to join us as well. So visit akettours.com. That link, let me make sure it's there. So it's a little bigger for y'all to see. akettours.com to get more information. And so we will be having a conference. I forgot the exact date. But these will be, or these are the speakers that are going to be presenting at that conference in Egypt thus far. So as more details emerge, of course, we'll be here to let you know. And so with that said, and uh, love and light to everyone who is in the chat and those who are on Facebook, on the Harold Johnson and the Imhotep page. And so we will get started now. I want to introduce our guest, Dr. Túndé Adégbolá, who is a research scientist, consulting engineer, and culture activist. He holds a bachelor's of science in electrical engineering, a master's of science in computer science, which I'm currently studying right now, and a PhD in information science. As executive director of African Languages Technologies Initiative, uh, commonly known as Alt-I, in Ibadan, Nigeria, he leads a team of researchers in appropriating human language technologies for African languages. And we'll get into that definitely in this hour here. In this regards, Alt-I partnered with Microsoft to localize Microsoft Windows and Office Suite for Hausa, Igbo, and the Yoruba language. Before Alt-I, he worked at Innovative Computing Group Incorporated in Ohio, in the United States, and applying cellular automata transform, um, known as CAT, which is an innovative data modeling technology developed in ICG for the perceptual compression of digital audio. A Chevening Scholar, honorary fellow of the Linguistics Association of Nigerian, and recipient of various other academic and professional awards. He has published many papers and journal articles in local and international scientific journals in the area of human language technology, and he is very much sought after as a speaker in local and international conferences. Matter of fact, I was just watching a TED Talk of our guests on education in Nigeria. And lastly, an accomplished performing musician and a former national athlete. He is currently married with 3 children. I want to welcome Dr. Túndé Adégbolá. Welcome to the program, sir. How are you doing?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, I want to kind of remind the listeners that we recently had an interview with the linguist and theologian Dr. Modupe Oduyoye, and it is Dr. Adégbolá who helped to facilitate that exchange. So I want to say again, thank you, for your help in bringing that together.
Thank
And
you.
so before we get into the meat of things, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of where you're from and what got you interested in science and technology?
Well, like you said, my name is Túndé Adégbolá. I grew up here in Nigeria as the son of a minister of the gospel, a reverend gentleman of the Methodist Church. And I was taught to be curious. And I discovered early in life that I couldn't memorize much. And whatever I had to know more by reasoning than by remembering. And that is the journey that took me into engineering, first of all, science, engineering, then electrical engineering, then I worked for some time as a broadcast engineer, then I went into computer science, and I found that the computer science for me was just a means to an end, because I had always felt that as the computer was developing, moving from very, very highly specialized arena into desktops of professionals and onto the high streets, that computer skills were moving from being specialized skills to professional skills, but have now become life skills. And in that sense, any people whose language is not integrated into the computer system, or to put it more accurately, any language in which the computer system remains agnostic, then the people are in a bit of a disadvantage. So this is what took me into working in the area of human language technology, to make sure that all African languages that the computer can be used in all African languages, so that anybody who wants to use the computer in Africa does not have to go and learn to speak English or speak French or speak any of these other colonial legacy languages. So that's, in a short, that's how I got where I am now.
Thank you. And you mentioned the language component, and it appears that you are familiar with linguistics, as a field of study. And so, do you find parallels, or how should I word the question? What made you get into the language component itself in the research process? I guess it just kind of ties into what you just said in terms of being able to create, for example, keyboard systems or whatnot, to deal with the languages, the various types of languages of Africa. But was it a hard jump to go from computer science engineering into language studies? And if not, was there any kind of parallels? What was the difficulties?
Well, it's usually said that the average African by necessarily is a polyglot, because to start with, you have to deal with your mother tongue, and then you have to deal with some colonial legacy language with which you engage the world. So I grew up in a Yoruba speaking family, and I grew up to learn to speak English. And later on in life, whilst I was walking around Africa, I was embarrassed each time I went into either the francophone or lusophone countries, and I'm doing some contract, and they had to employ an interpreter that goes with me everywhere. So I then decided to learn to speak French so that I can work in francophone West African countries without the need of having an interpreter. I haven't succeeded with Portuguese, but at least I can attend meetings in French. So with three languages, my position is that you have three windows to the world, because every language is an avenue for looking at the world. The Yoruba word for language is Ede. The word Ede is a noun derived from the verb de, which is to bind. So for the Yoruba, philosophically, language is the binder of thoughts. So when you use language as a binder of thought, when you use language as a means of concretizing and giving structure to what you have in your mind as an abstraction of what you see of the world around you, the more languages you have, the better you are equipped to engage, interpret, and represent your experiences in the world. So this was the background I grew up with, a Yoruba-speaking family, learning to speak English in school, later on in life, having to learn French, and now seeing that each of these three languages bind thought in radically different ways and in excitingly the same ways. And that dichotomy is an interesting one that makes you think deeply that cultures are never one superior to the other, but are essentially different. And they are just ways of looking at the world. Now, with an engineering background, it was not very obvious to me that language can be a subject of engineering. But with time, I discovered that language itself is a technology. If we look at technology from the point of view that technology is any attempt to exploit natural principles to improve the human condition, then we can see language as a means of using technology to create abstract versions of the real world, and thereby make things easier for the human. When I saw this, I found it really, really exciting, and I started seeing that all the mathematics I learned as an engineering student, all the mathematics I learned as a computer science student, I can actually apply to language and I will get results. The initial difficulty I had was that I didn't have any understanding of the subject, the really, really beautiful subject of linguistics. But with time, I was able to read books like Linguistics for Non-Linguists, such books like that. And the Circle of Linguists in Nigeria just took me in with open arms. And I was able to get to understand the whole subject of linguistics. And the more I looked at it, the more I saw possibilities of saying a lot of the things that linguists, Nigerian linguists, African linguists have been saying, engaging impressionistically. I saw the opportunity to apply instrumental approaches to looking at this phenomena. And some of the things that they are saying in prose, I found that it is possible to say them statistically and probabilistically and actually use mathematical theory to derive the same results as many of the scholars before me have derived impressionistically and expressing in prose. And I found that we will write one little simple mathematical equation that will bring all this together. And that was really, really exciting for me. And that's what I spend my time doing now.
Indeed, yes.
Yes.
I know that, like for me, you know, being a software developer and now getting into computer science as a subject, but always being in linguistics, I understand. I look at computer science from the standpoint of linguistics because let me see. I'm gonna mute your mic because I think it's some echoing, and I'll unmute it in a second. We know that at the base of the computer are these chips that are essentially, control gates for the flow of electricity. And these transistors and or logic gates operate in such a way that a certain flow of current represents a certain concept that is meaningful in the human world in terms of calculations and or representing some kind of thought or imagery, whatever it may come to realize. And so I realized that it ultimately is a language in the same way that you would use like Morse code to represent certain things. So of course we represent them in zeros and ones, but even that is just an arbitrary symbolic designation of true or false or on and off in terms of the flow of current. And it reminds me of the video that you shared in regards to the Ifa tradition and the binariness inherent in the divination system, and how that is even used in computers today. So I want to ask you if you can to elaborate on that conversation that you was having in the video in regards to the divination system and the relationship to of binary that is inherent within that the Yoruba religious tradition, and how it has echoes in our modern computer system today.
Well, that's a very, very interesting story. First and foremost, we should be aware that there is this uncanny relationship between numerical systems and nominal systems. By numerical systems, I mean situations in which you can either count or measure, and represent reality by counts and measures. 10 people, 12 kilograms. These are elements of reality that can be expressed mathematically, numerically, I mean. Blue ball, big house. These are also elements of reality that you represent nominally, nominal by name, by categories. The values are essentially qualitative rather than quantitative. But there's always a relationship. You can relate the two. You can use numbers to represent nominals. And that is one important fundamental basis of modern computation. Incidentally, it is also a fundamental principle in Yorùbá Ifá system, in which numbers are used to represent circumstances of life. And when someone is trying to understand certain elements, certain aspects of life, the Ifá system represents various aspects of life as numbers between 1 and 256. And each of these 256 volumes of knowledge also have verses and examples of natural social situations, stories of archetypal situations, and how to deal with these situations. So the ability to represent reality with numbers is one very, very important aspect of computing. And incidentally, the same aspect is also found in Ifá system. Now, if you look critically at the Ifá system, you'll now find that it has uncanny similarity to modern computing. It's based on a system of binary arithmetic. It's also based on a system of representation, using numbers to represent real things, nominal issues. It is based on modular arithmetic. It is based on permutations. It's a system of coding. And all these are parallels between Ifá system and computer system. Now, the interesting thing is that the basis of computing, long before Alan Turing, that did some of the background theoretical work for computing, came from George Boole, who was born in around 1822, I think. And he developed his mathematical analysis of logic in 1847. But we have records of Ifá consultation by Aláàfin as far back as Aláàfin Onígbògi, who was the 8th Aláàfin that was born around 1500 and reigned from about 1500. So
and
here, pardon?
Just to bring clarity for those who don't know, an Aláàfin is a king, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes. So we have records of kings in Yoruba land that have had Ifá consultation as far back as 1500. So that is at least 346 7 years before George Bull was born. And this system had been there. So all the structured approach to looking at life by representing real situations with a binary system of numbers, coding, permutation, and all that has been done by the Yoruba at least 300 years before George Bull, who laid the foundation of the theories that were used to develop computers. Then, if we look also at the Yoruba act of speaking with drums, we see another parallel there. We see another parallel with modern telecommunications, or even more importantly, more fundamentally, modern information theory, information coding theory. Because the Yoruba language is a tone language in which not only consonants and vowels carry the meaning in speech, the tone also carries the meaning in speech. The easiest way to explain this to somebody who doesn't speak a tone language is to give the example that when you ask a question, you tend to raise your voice towards the end, and when you make a statement, you tend to lower your voice as you get to the end. So if you say, "This is my book," that's a statement. You say, "This is my book," that's a question. So we have used tone, we've used stress, some kind of differences in tone there to represent meaning. In the Yoruba language, a lot of the meaning is represented in tones. And that is why it is possible to beat out a tone, a kind of tone melody on the drums, and you will be communicating. And what we'll find is that there are various systems of drum, the Yoruba drum language. We have the Dundun tradition, we have the bàtá, bedu, and various. In the Dundun tradition, for example, which are hourglass drums, continuous tone variation from tension, but from giving varying tensions to the drum membrane, you can almost speak as people speak one with the other. But with bàtá, with the bàtá tradition, there are fixed pitches with which you can say things. Now you find that in the bàtá, there is the drum strokes that represent speech. And between the drum strokes that represent speech, there is an intermediate language which is referred to as the Eno bàtá, like the coding of bàtá. And this is another uncanny resemblance to computing systems in which you have machine language, which can be looked at the drum strokes. You have the Eno bàtá, which is like an assembler or a compiler, and you have the codes in as close to natural language as possible. So you find these various levels of interaction between what the Yoruba have done 500, 600, 700 years ago and what modern science is just discovering. And you find that they are so similar in structure that one feels a lot of the practices of Yoruba antiquity that we attribute to mysticism, spirituality, and religion are actually essentially scientific. I do not deny the spiritual. I do not deny the essence of the spirituality. But what I'm saying is that there are lots of scientific principles that were very, very well understood by the Yoruba 500 years ago that are just becoming apparent to modern science and technology.
Excellent indeed. You mentioned the tones in the Yoruba language. And the field of linguistics that I study is historical comparative linguistics, which is concerned with the reconstruction of the parent ancestral language that evolved into the current languages and dialects that we see at present. And so, one of the things that isn't talked about is the loss of grammatical features to the contribution of tonal genesis in languages. But don't want to necessarily go there, but I wanted to ask you in regards to that work that you mentioned earlier in terms of representing these African languages through the computer systems, and what are the inherent difficulties, for example, of creating like a keyboard system or whatever in regards to the tone aspect of the Yoruba language or any other tonal language in these computer systems. Like what have been some challenges in dealing with that?
Well, the main challenge of representing a tone language in writing was solved for Yoruba some 200 years ago by European missionaries supporting the great Yoruba returnee slave Simon Ajayi Crowther, who did the work of reducing Yoruba, the bulk of the work of reducing Yoruba to a written system. Of course, the European missionaries could not really understand this idea about tone language. What do you mean tone language? I mean, are the consonants, do you know all the consonants? Yes, we do. Do you know all the vowels? Yes, we do. Then what else? They say, oh, each vowel can take 3 different tones. And by taking these different tones, it means something else. See, in Yoruba, for example, Owo would mean hand. Owo. Owo means honor. Owo means group. Owo means broom. So the tone on each of the 2 vowels in that word makes it possible to represent those 2 syllables in 8 ways. It is 2 to power 3, because there are 3 tones and there are 2 syllables. You can permute those 2 syllables with tones in 8 ways. 2 number of syllables 2, number of tones 3, 2 to power 3. So if you have like 7 syllables, then you can permute those 7 syllables in 2 to power 7 ways. This is 128. So you can have a whole language based on hum. Every Friday, I sit here in my home, a drummer comes around, and he's talking to me with his drum. And after about 10, 15 minutes of his drumming, I'm moved and I go out and we exchange pleasantries, exchange gifts, and he goes off. Because that is an age-old tradition of communicating with drums. Now, the main problem is we need to be able to represent not just the consonant and the vowels, but also the tones. And that is usually done in Yoruba, for example, it is done by indicating the tones by some diacritical marks of a low, mid, and high tone on each vowel. So, but when computing came, and computing was modeled on the typewriter, the main input for the computer is modeled around the typewriter keyboard. It was difficult to type Yoruba materials according to standard orthography, because the standard orthography demanded of you to apply tone marks on the vowels for each syllable. So what I did then was to look critically at the typewriter type keyboard, the so-called QWERTY, QWERTY, top row from left to right on the computer keyboard, and find ways by which we could indicate tones. And also because some Yoruba letters have underdots, which make them sound, if, for example, the sh sound, which is usually in English represented as SH, we don't represent it as a digraph in Yoruba. We represent it as S with an underdot. The E also has an underdot, so we can distinguish with E and the E with underdots, with O and O with underdots. So what I did was that I looked at the QWERTY keyboard and I noticed something very interesting, that there are mainly 5 keys on the QWERTY keyboard that the Yoruba writing system does not use. Yoruba doesn't use Z. There's no Z sound in the Yoruba language. The Yoruba language doesn't use X. The Yoruba language doesn't use C. The Yoruba language doesn't use V. And the Yoruba language doesn't use Q. So what I did was to rearrange the mapping of the keyboard, use Q to represent the underdotted O, use Z to represent the underdotted S, use X to represent the underdotted E, and then use C to indicate the low tone and V for the high tone. And that was basically what I did with the keyboard. But that was really an elementary problem, because I have written that problem of creating keyboards now as an undergraduate project, and I give to students. And I've said at a conference recently that any department of computer science in a Nigerian university where the language of the city in which that computer science department is cannot be typed on a computer in standard orthography is due to be closed down. That should be the first thing that computer science department should do to make it relevant to the society, to the environment. So I've developed a scheme by which this can be done as undergraduate projects. But the more important thing we are doing now is a project we describe as redefining literacy. We talk of redefining literacy because normally literacy is defined as the capacity to read and write, the ability to read and write. Now, with emerging new technologies, we now have the facility of multimedia. And I have always argued that had the audio recorder been invented before writing, writing will not be as important as it is today. So with multimedia, we can still give orature some of the advantages of writing, like the advantages of permanence, the advantage of mobility, the advantages of precision. We can do all that with multimedia. You can read some old sage who cannot read and write can record their voice and send it over to other people, just as it's done.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. But the more important thing is that we now have speech technologies of speech recognition, in which a person speaks and the computer turns what is said into writing, speech synthesis, in which somebody takes a written material and it can be automatically converted into speech. So with such speech technologies, we can then develop technologies that can make any speaker speak to a device, and the device turns the speech into written text, or delivers written text, and the device turns the written text into speech. So we then query, if that is possible, who then still is an illiterate? So we are therefore seek, and we are making lots of progress, to redefine literacy by changing the definition of literacy from the ability to read and write to the capacity to interact with literature. And we say also with a little bit of pun, that we can turn every illiterate to an illiterate, somebody who is literate by electronic means, an illiterate rather than an illiterate. So we've done lots of work in this area here at Altai. We've done a speech synthesis, speech recognition in a number of Nigerian languages. We are working on machine translation in some of our languages, such that it should be possible for a Yoruba to pick up a phone, dial an Igbo brother, and because the telephone knows that this person is Igbo, when you speak, what is said is transformed from speech into writing. The writing is transformed from Yoruba into Igbo in writing. The Igbo writing is then synthesized as speech on the other end, so that the two people can converse in their languages, and neither of them knowing the language in which the other one is speaking, because they are hearing the interlocutor. Each person, each one is hearing the interlocutor in the language they understand. So these are some of the things that we are trying to do with these modern computing facilities. Of course, every culture, every situation will use these things in the ways that solve their problems, and that is what we are trying to do. If in the United States, if in England, if in Europe, the best that they can use speech recognition for is to do closed captioning for deaf people, good enough. For us, with the level of illiteracy around, we want to use it to circumvent illiteracy and make people who cannot read and write interact with literature, and thereby contribute to the development process, which information communication technologies are supposed to be productivity enhancement in the process of development.
So basically, it would take advantage of the concept of an assembly, like you mentioned earlier. So one language would be the assembly language for the other, or the process on the phone, but and so like when you were speaking earlier, that was the first thing that I was thinking about, like, how would the software recognize the tones and the semantic meanings, more so. So that's the challenge. So for example, for me, being in historical comparative linguistics, and especially I like, doing comparative work with ancient Egyptian and Sumerian and Meroitic languages with modern African languages. And one of the things that we're concerned about is, like, being able to, enter data into a database and being able to search and match, the words and determine the cognacy between the languages, because currently it takes, a lifetime to be able to do comparative work manually and to get familiar with all of the languages. But one of the things that is becoming difficult for me to really kind of translate machine wise is the concept of semantics, and ultimately, like, how do you program a semantic or the meanings, that is understood in a human context, and to be able to and to be able to for the computer to understand that, two words may be cognate but have drifted semantically, over time. So for example, in many of the world's languages, the physical word for head becomes the word used for someone in leadership, a president, a king, or whatnot. And so while you're typing in the word for king, how would the computer know to bring up the word for head as well, based upon some other criterion when it comes to so that's what I'm concerned with and focused with now, and I'm glad.
Interesting problem. Happens to be that's the problem I've spent the last 20 years of my life solving. First of all, starting from the tone aspect of it, I took great advantage of my background in electrical engineering to engage the phonetics and the phonology of involved, and to identify what really is the acoustics of tone. What is the acoustic correlate of Yoruba tone, the pitch, the difference in pitch of the voice that translates into meaning. So having done that, having solved the problem, the acoustic problem, now the next thing is the representation of this, to the representation of ideas. I said earlier on that to the Yoruba, language is the binder of thoughts. Language is what you use to bind thoughts together. And the kind of problem you are talking about, you will have experienced some when you try to use some translation software like Google Translate and all that. I have a friend called Bildad, and we shorten his name to Bill. And it said a sentence like, Bill will give a full account of what happened during the conference. And the computer said that the bill, looked at the bill as because of the word account, the computer assumed that you are talking in an environment of money and such things. So bill was translated to the kind of piece of paper you present to somebody to pay, and account as the analysis of money spent and all that. So you do have all that problem. But basically, it is not a problem that doesn't have solution. Now, in modern day, the developments in artificial intelligence, developments in machine learning and neural networks, deep learning, and all that, we have principles and tools like word embedding, analysis that actually indicate to the computer the core of a particular word based on the context. For example, between English and French, it is now possible, unaided, to make the computer understand, without writing any rules, that a king is the male version of a queen. Just by looking at contexts of use of the words and developing some mathematical manipulations of these contexts, you find that you can then represent words. You can represent words as what in mathematics we refer to as vectors, to the extent that if you subtract the vector royalty from the vector queen, you might get the vector female.
Hmm.
I mean, actually, arithmetical subtraction. You have a vector representing queen. You have a vector representing royalty. So if you actually subtract royalty from queen, you'll get female. And there are systems like that now. There are tools like that that are beginning to embody and incorporate the meaning. And of course, you spoke earlier on about our great philologist and theologian Pa Modupe Oduyoye. I am so fortunate to breathe the same air he breathes, and I've been developing schemes to use some of these methods to extend some of the things he's been talking about. I mean, he is just an unbelievably gifted person with a wide range of languages, and he can connect very many languages. People like us, lesser mortals, comfortable with my 3 languages, and to be able to really take what he's saying, push what he's saying for, because he's saying really, really fundamental things. But because most people he's talking to don't even have his depth and width of language understanding, it seems he's saying things that are not easily understandable. But I have come to see that developing the appropriate theories around his ideas and ability to present these things to the computer will just be dynamite, because we can then look at various languages, write a bot that just goes around the internet looking for various languages and relating these words. So definitely, I will be really, really interested in the kind of problems you are looking at. And with young background in computer science and my own background in computer science too, we should be able to have some common vocabulary to devise solutions to some of these problems. There are still problems here and there, but they are, the problem you describe are problems that are that can be solved. Maybe Western science and technology has not devoted enough time to looking at those things at the moment, because they are not the scientific community maybe do not have the kind of emotional attachment we have to some of these problems. So it's a problem for you and I to solve. We are the ones that need to establish this, our past, and the responsibility is ours. I've always said that I always define technology as the answer to questions raised by culture. Every problem that technology solves is raised by culture. Yeah. So for us who have these unique problems, these unique circumstances, it is our responsibility to devise the tools to address them. So let's join hands.
Indeed. And we're wrapping up soon here. And I just wanted to, before you go, well, first and foremost, to the listeners who are, just joining us, I am interviewing Dr. Túndé Adégbolá out of Nigeria, who is a scientist and language technologist and a cultural activist and a host of other things, which we didn't get a chance to get into today. But I want to make sure that, if he is able to come back on this program in the future to expand on the work in which he's doing, that y'all get the notifications that he is coming on. So in order for y'all to do that, I'm gonna need y'all to That is right. I need y'all to hit the like button and to hit the subscribe button. So, and make sure that you hit the bell when you hit the subscribe button so that you can get those notifications when we bring guests like Professor here today. And before you go, I want to make sure that I ask you about the Alt-I project and institute. And I think this is the website here. What is Alt-I, and what do y'all hope to achieve, with this organization?
Well, ALTI is an acronym for African Languages Technology Initiative. The acronym was devised at a time when Alt-I was the symbol for insert in computing. And the idea is that we have chosen to insert issues of Africa into the agenda of the knowledge age. And the whole idea is to ensure that no African will have to learn a foreign language in order to be able to live in the information age. That is based on digital technologies, information technologies, communication technologies. We've always explained that Africa did undergo colonization, and colonization was an activity in which actual physical resources were taken. The core objective of colonization was to acquire physical material resources. Now we've moved from an age of colonization. We are now moving into an age of globalization in which language becomes the core of globalization, because we talk now of globalization because information and communication technologies are making communication easy. And our position in Altai is globalization without the required attention to the language in which information communication technologies are capable is tantamount to a second age of colonization. And for us, we put all our energies into ensuring that we would be able to develop the technologies that will make the computer relevant to to as many African languages as possible. And how do we go about that? Our primary objective is to train those who will do it. We don't see ourselves as doing, because there are 2,000 odd African languages. So rather than try to firefight, what we are devoting our attention and our efforts to is to train young people who are capable in computational linguistics, human language technology, natural language processing. It is unfortunate that at the moment, as of today in West Africa, there is no university that has a program in computational linguistics. None has a program in human language technology. None has a formal program in natural language processing. They are just, some of the universities that look at these things just look at them as maybe one topic in artificial intelligence or in maybe in corpus linguistics and such things. So we have been working in the last 20 years to build a base for training language technologists, human language technologists, computational linguists, people who are capable of doing natural language processing in African languages, such that we can then develop the necessary technologies that will make it possible for computers to work in as many African languages as possible. These are the kind of things we do. And it's interesting that we have found that in many situations, some of the tools, even some of the theories that have been developed in the Western world to explain how these languages work do not totally apply to our languages. And to the extent that I had posited that all the work that have been done so far in cognitive sciences, whatever has been done in cognitive sciences that based on language as the main output of the human mind has been based on about 30 similar languages out of about 7,000 languages in the world.
Hmm.
That in statistics is referred to as convenience sampling.
Hmm.
So the kind of results we get from that cannot be generalized. And in doing what we are doing, we have found that some of the tools that are touted as, oh, these are the tools to do this and that, do not apply to our languages. For example, the subject of automatic morphology, in which you give the computer reading text in a language and the computer is able to figure out how the words are made up of smaller units and all that. The way words are made up in our languages are not the same way words are made up in German or French or English or any of those languages. So we have found that we need to develop our own theories, develop our own frameworks, develop our own tools to do these things. And that is exactly what African Language Technology Initiative is there for. And well, we have a bit to show for our being there.
Hmm. Yes, and I'm finding more and more the need for African people to become pioneers in various different uh, spheres of science because of those challenges that are, or those characteristics that are unique to African circumstances, in which, you know, a Eurocentric worldview normalizes their way of being and trying to apply it to everyone else, and that may not be the case. So for example, like you mentioned earlier, for the computer system to uh determine that, you know, like a king, and then the opposite is a queen. Well, in my language studies, you know, I've come across languages in Africa where the concept of a king is really just an office, and that the same word can be applied to a woman. So you wouldn't know, like you couldn't say that, for example, you know, her husband is, you know, her queen, you know, like
Yeah.
so while in Europe a king may strictly be a male, in these African cultures a king may be
Yeah.
a woman, you know. And I think of, like, off the top, King Peggy out of Ghana, you know, who's a king in her in her community, in village in Ghana. But you know, it is, she's a king, she's not a queen. Like, so there's just no feminine uh opposite. So
Yeah.
you know, only African people, you know, who really know that about the cultures can interrupt and be like, hey, well, we got to reconfigure something here, because you know, this may not necessarily be biologically gendered in that way.
Exactly. That's really, really interesting because I mean, I've dealt with that problem over and over and over again,
Yeah.
and even in anthropology, people have dealt with that problem. But in Yoruba language, for example,
Uh-huh.
gender really does not exist.
Mm.
I know some European scholars who are trying to argue that there is gender in Yoruba, but my innate understanding of Yoruba, the notion of gender does not exist. There's biological sex,
Mm-hmm.
But gender doesn't really exist. You might look at concept like ako, which people have said is the male gender in Yoruba, and abo, which people think is the female gender. But if a lady walks with a gait, you'll say she is being ako.
Hmm.
So, I mean, if you then look at ako as male gender, you are now saying the woman is being male by walking with, by carrying herself daintily. I mean, that is, I mean, it doesn't make sense. And you talk of things like the mother drum, a millstone. If you say ako okuta, you're now saying a millstone. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Of course, granted, a language like French makes gender distinction between pencils and rulers and such things. But these are ideas that are totally alien to some of our languages. And whatever is done in those areas will be valid only for the cultures within which the texts from which these materials, the data is extracted. By the time you apply such methods to texts in Yoruba language, you see these are some of the things that we are looking at Altai, and we're looking at how do you really explain word embeddings in when you use Yoruba data. We see some strange, interesting things, and it is really, really exciting what we are doing.
Yes, yes. Well, I really do appreciate greatly, you taking this time to share your history and your experiences, with this global audience. And I encourage each and every one of you who are listening live, and especially those of you who are listening to the archives, to research Dr. Adégbolá. And he's involved in some very fascinating work, and I think that he is the personification of what I mean about kind of integrating the science and culture aspect to be able to solve modern problems. And so make sure that if you want to know more about the Alt-I project and organization, to visit this link that you see on the screen, and check out his papers. I'm currently reading a paper that he co-wrote called Word Level Language Identification Strategy for Resource Scarce Languages. And so this is something that I'm very interested in, and we'll have some insights once I finish that. And so in parting, do you have any final words that you want to share with the audience that we weren't able to get in this short time span?
Well, lots to say, not much time to say that. Just to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity of a global audience. One thing we say in Altai is that in telecommunications, we talk of the last half mile of getting information to people. After we've taken care of marine cables, taking care of microwave links, taking care of fiber networks, and all that, and all that, and all that, and all that. And at the end of the day, you've been able to make data, put data on a terminal before somebody. Now, we say in Altai that there is a last 6 odd inches of that digital divide. And that last 6 inches of the digital divide can only be breached by the use of an appropriate language. No matter what the technologies we have deployed to make data and information and knowledge available to users, the last 6 inches between the eyes of the user and the terminal equipment can only be breached by use of the appropriate language. And that is what we at Altai have dedicated our efforts to doing, to be able to make it possible for everybody, as many people as possible in Africa, to be able to use computers in their preferred languages. They shouldn't be made to go and learn a foreign language to be able to use computers.
Indeed, indeed. And with that said, again, I thank you for coming on, and I hope to have you back soon in the near future. And I'll definitely be reaching out to you just for other reasons. And I mentioned earlier to the listening audience that today is a double header. So we have one more interview today. It's going to be with Dr. Duarte Odara out of Brazil. We're going to be live from Brazil, and we're going to be talking about African classical African philosophy and Ptah-hotep, and just a host of other things from our good brother. So we've had him on before, and now that he's completed his doctorate, we're going to kind of focus on his research for the PhD. So y'all make sure that y'all come back at around 6 p.m. Eastern time to check out our good brother. And so with that said, y'all have a blessed morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And I will see you all later. All right, peace.